March 29th brings a noticeable shift in how you relate to everything you have been processing over the past few days. After a period of emotional depth, internal awareness, and subtle shifts in reaction, today begins to lift your perspective. The moon moves into Sagittarius, and this changes the way your experience is filtered. Instead of focusing on what you feel, you may begin to focus on what it means. This creates a sense of movement. You may notice that your attention shifts outward. Thoughts may begin to center around direction, possibility, and what comes next rather than what has already happened. Situations that felt emotionally significant may now feel like part of a larger picture. Sagittarius energy expands perspective. It encourages you to step back and see beyond the immediate experience. Instead of being immersed in the details of a feeling, you begin to ask how that experience fits into your overall path. This can create a sense of relief. Emotional intensity often feels heavy because it is close. When perspective expands, that same experience becomes easier to carry. It is still meaningful, but it is no longer overwhelming. You may also feel a desire for movement. Not necessarily physical movement, but mental or directional movement. You may feel drawn toward new ideas, new possibilities, or simply a different way of thinking about something. This can show up as curiosity. You may want to explore, learn, or understand something from a broader viewpoint. Questions may shift from "why did this happen" to "what can I take from this?" At the same time, this energy introduces a sense of optimism. Even if nothing has changed externally, your perception may begin to shift toward possibility rather than limitation. This does not ignore reality, it reframes it. The key dynamic of today is perspective, not changing what happened, but changing how you relate to it. Because when your perspective expands, what once felt heavy becomes something you can move forward with. To understand the deeper psychology of March 29, we need to look at what happens when emotion shifts from depth into meaning. The moon represents how you feel and how you process experience internally. Over the past few days, that processing has been focused on depth, intensity, and emotional awareness. You were closer to the feeling itself, closer to what something meant on a personal and immediate level. Now the moon moves into Sagittarius. This changes the function of emotion. Instead of moving inward, emotion begins to expand outward. It becomes less about the intensity of the feeling and more about the interpretation of it. Sagittarius does not stay inside the experience. It seeks to understand what the experience represents in a broader context. Psychologically, this creates distance. Not emotional disconnection, but perspective. You may still remember what you felt, but you are no longer inside it in the same way. This allows the mind to begin asking different questions. Instead of focusing on the emotional weight, you begin to explore the meaning behind it. This is where meaning-making begins. Sagittarius is associated with belief systems, philosophy, and the search for understanding. It does not just experience events, it interprets them as part of a larger narrative. You may notice that your thoughts begin to shift in this direction. What did this teach me? How does this fit into my path? What does this change moving forward? These questions may not appear directly, but your thinking may naturally move toward them. Another important psychological effect of Sagittarius energy is optimism. Not in a superficial sense, but in the ability to see possibility beyond the current situation. When you step back from immediate emotion, you create space to see what else is available. This does not ignore what happened, it reframes it. You may begin to recognize that what felt difficult or intense also carries value in terms of growth, direction, or understanding. This recognition can create a sense of lightness, even if the experience itself was heavy. Sagittarius also introduces movement. Emotion is no longer static. It begins to move towards something. You may feel a desire to progress, to explore, or to shift your focus toward what is next rather than what has already occurred. This is where forward momentum begins, not through force, but through perspective. At the same time, Sagittarius can sometimes move too quickly past depth. There can be a tendency to look for meaning before fully integrating the experience. The key is balance. Perspective should include depth, not replace it. The deeper lesson of this transit is expansion through understanding. Not just feeling something and not just analyzing it, but placing it within a larger context that allows it to make sense. Because when experience becomes meaning, it no longer feels like something that happened to you. It becomes something that moves you forward. On a practical level, March 29th may feel like a day where your mindset begins to lift, even if nothing around you has changed. You might notice that you were less focused on what you were feeling over the past few days and more focused on what you want to do next. Thoughts may feel lighter, more open, and more directed toward possibility rather than analysis. This shift can show up in small but noticeable ways. You may feel more willing to move on from something that was holding your attention. A thought that repeated itself before may now feel complete. Instead of revisiting the same emotional space, your mind may begin exploring what lies ahead. Another pattern that may appear today is curiosity. You may feel drawn toward learning something new, exploring a different idea, or simply thinking about things from a wider perspective. Even in everyday situations, you may find yourself asking different kinds of questions, ones that are less focused on the immediate and more focused on the bigger picture. You may also notice a change in your conversations. Interactions may feel lighter, more open, and less intense. There may be a natural shift toward discussing ideas, plans, or possibilities, rather than emotions or deeper analysis. This can create an ease in communication. At the same time, you may feel a desire for movement. This does not necessarily mean physical activity, but a sense that staying in the same mental or emotional space no longer feels necessary. You may feel ready to move forward, even if the direction is still forming. Another noticeable pattern is a reduction in emotional heaviness. Situations that felt intense may now feel more manageable. You may still be aware of them, but they no longer carry the same weight. This creates space for you to think more clearly about what you want to do next. You may also feel more optimistic, not in a forced way, but as a natural result of stepping back from intensity. When you are not fully inside an emotion, it becomes easier to see possibility. At the same time, it is important not to rush past everything. There can be a tendency to move forward quickly, to focus only on what is next without fully integrating what has just happened. The key is to carry the understanding with you rather than leaving it behind. The most helpful approach today is forward awareness. Notice where your attention is going. Notice what feels complete. Notice what feels ready to move forward. And allow yourself to follow that movement without forcing a specific outcome. Because today is not about solving everything. It is about allowing your perspective to expand enough that movement becomes natural. Now bring this shift in perspective into your own experience, sign by sign. Today is not about what you felt, it's about what you do with it, how you interpret it, and how it begins shaping your direction forward. If you're an Aries, your focus may shift quickly toward what comes next. Something you recently moved through emotionally may now feel like a stepping stone rather than a weight. Growth for you lies in choosing direction consciously, not just moving forward out of momentum. If you're a Taurus, your perspective around stability may begin to expand. Something that once felt fixed may now feel more flexible. Growth comes from allowing your sense of security to evolve rather than keeping it tied to past expectations. If you're a Gemini, your thoughts may open up into new ideas and possibilities. You may feel ready to move beyond recent emotional depth into something more exploratory. Growth lies in choosing which ideas to follow rather than scattering your focus. If you're a Cancer, your emotional experiences may begin to translate into understanding. Something you felt deeply may now make sense in a broader way. Growth comes from using that understanding to guide your next step rather than staying in the feeling. If you're a Leo, your outlook may become more optimistic. Something that felt uncertain may now feel like part of a larger path. Growth lies in trusting that perspective without needing immediate confirmation. If you're a Virgo, your focus may shift toward practical direction. You may begin thinking about how to apply what you have learned. Growth comes from turning insight into action rather than continuing to analyze it. If you're a Libra, relationships may feel lighter and more open. You may find it easier to see situations from a broader perspective. Growth lies in allowing space within connection rather than trying to define everything immediately. If you're a Scorpio, emotional intensity may begin to transform into understanding. You may feel less attached to a specific reaction and more aware of what it meant. Growth comes from allowing that awareness to guide your choices. If you're a Sagittarius, this energy aligns naturally with you. You may feel a renewed sense of direction, curiosity, or motivation. Growth comes from grounding that expansion, so it leads somewhere meaningful. If you're a Capricorn, your sense of structure may begin to include new possibilities. Something that felt rigid may now feel adjustable. Growth comes from integrating flexibility into your plans. If you're an Aquarius, your perspective may shift in a way that opens new ways of thinking. You may feel less limited by previous assumptions. Growth lies in following that new perspective into action. And if you're a Pisces, your emotional awareness may expand into meaning. Something you felt deeply may now feel like part of your growth. Growth comes from allowing that meaning to shape your direction. As we close March 29, notice how perspective changes the weight of experience. Over the past few days, you may have moved through intensity, understanding, and emotional depth. You may have felt something strongly, recognized what it meant, and allowed it to shift your awareness. Today did not add more depth. It gave you distance. Not distance to disconnect, but distance to see. You may have noticed that something that once felt heavy now feels easier to carry, not because it disappeared, but because it now fits into a larger understanding. What once felt like a moment may now feel like part of a process. This is how meaning forms, not in the moment itself, but in how you place that moment within your path. You may have felt a quiet shift today, a sense that you are ready to move forward, a sense that something no longer needs your full attention, a sense that what you experienced has already given you what it needed to give. This does not mean it was small. It means it is now integrated. And when something becomes integrated, it no longer holds you in the same way. It moves with you. Tonight, you might reflect on something simple. What feels lighter now than it did before? What experience has begun to make sense in a broader way? And what direction feels more possible because of it? These are not questions about the past. They are questions about movement. Because when you understand something deeply enough, you no longer stay with it. You carry it forward. And in doing so, you realize that growth is not just about what you go through. It is about how you move beyond it.